Welcome into Behind the Wheelhouse. You're on with Jay and Jay on Trucker Talk Radio. I'm John. This is Justin. We have a great guest on. Here's the setup. There are a lot of people in the trucking industry who talk about safety and then go there. And then there are the people who actually live it, who built careers around making sure drivers go home in one piece. Our guest today is firmly in the category. Scott Conklin is the driver operations and safety manager at Dedicated Systems Incorporated, a specialized hauling carrier based out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And when I say specialized, I mean it. These guys haul unique and oversized nationwide loads. They've got a 99.8% on-time delivery. They run their own repair shop. And this is real. They've got a coffee shop on site for their driver, Wisco Sips. We'll get to that. But here's what really got us. Scott didn't just show up to work one day and decide to post hot takes about the trucking industry online. He sat down and wrote a serious, thought out proposal. A lot of the same things that we're talking about with our group over at Ready App, arguing that the way CSA scores work needs to fundamentally change to actually protect drivers and not just carriers. That takes guts, and it takes someone who genuinely cares. Let's talk about where you're from, your upbringing, how you got into trucking, and where you are today.
Yeah, originally born and bred over at Michigan. I grew up in the UP of Michigan, up in Marquette. Was born in Lower Michigan, so I was
Very nice.
considered a troll for many years, but finally got my Uper wings after spending about a decade and a half up there. So ended up leaving for the military. Joined the Air Force pretty much right out of high school. Went to college for about a year and didn't work out, and then from there transferred. From Louisiana area back up to Michigan. Eventually found my way to Wisconsin and over into the trucking industry at Schneider National. I started, obviously the big orange company, and that was
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
harping about safety. And so that was my first introduction to trucks and the world of trucking. And had a pretty good upbringing in there. Started on a second shift dispatch, dealing with drivers and getting them, to and from locations. Worked my way into some recruiting for a while. I got to see, the colorful backgrounds that we have from our fleets out there, and what they're dealing with and coming in the door. And having lots of good conversations about trying to fight for drivers to get them jobs at times and have to defend why you want to hire them. And then from there, jumped into taking over the Georgia Pacific account over at Schneider National. It was my first real kind of time cutting my teeth, learning about the industry and what it takes to get drivers from A to B and getting reloads and, getting them home and good home time, and spending a lot of time with drivers, their conversations about their trucks and where they're going and their family, and dealing with those kind of things. And then eventually I got a chance to move up into a driver management role and really kind of dive into the safety side, coming over here to Dedicated Systems, which was in 2015, and fell in love with it. It's in a smaller family-run company. At the time we, had 70 drivers, and it was your hands on everything. You're not just
Yeah.
doing safety. You're dealing with every aspect of getting them for repairs, getting them home on the weekends. Their family, their kids, the wives, the girlfriends, the whole kit and caboodle behind everything. And you hear all the stories, and it's great conversations that came from all of that, and it really kind of opened my eyes to what happens to get our products and groceries from A to B and all the stuff that we get to take for granted every day, and everything that goes in this industry. And then after a couple of years, I spent about 7 years here at Dedicated, moved over into the repair side, went over to Master Fleet, which is another Wisconsin-based company here. Really got my hands dirty on the maintenance side. And then last year, came back to Dedicated. They asked me to come back home, and came back about last year and dove right back into it again. Been doing that since. So,
Yeah. So about 6 months ago, you wrote, "We need to change the CSA. We need to change to CSA." What did you mean there? And talk about your proposal for a new driver-based CSA scoring system. We want to know more.
yeah, so a lot of the prompt came, when you spend a lot of time when drivers would get pulled in, they get a bad inspection for various reasons. And you spend a lot of time trying to get those removed off the records and arguing back and forth with different officials. And it really all kind of comes back to insurance and our scores and how we're, determined to be a good company, bad company, those kind of things. And surprisingly, getting a deep dive into industry is that something as simple as your CSA score has a big effect on a trucking company and the drivers, your money, and how we spend our income. Seeing the major impact that comes from that, I wanted to take a deeper dive to say, like, how can we fix this so that it's fair to the drivers, it's especially good drivers, and fair to the companies, where you're not essentially being, held to, we'll say the witch's post, year over year because you happen to have one bad driver, one bad egg that came through and kind of ruined it for
Right.
everybody else.
Right. So here's a scenario. A great driver spends 2 years at a carrier with a bad maintenance culture. Trucks are always borderline. Violations pile up at inspections. That driver finally leaves, but the damage is done to their PSP. Under your proposed system, how would that story end differently?
Yeah, so it goes both ways. So on the maintenance side, that the carrier, the equipment that is not necessarily up to snuff that's getting out there, that stays with the company. The company is responsible for their equipment, making sure that it's done properly. And there's always some leeway in there. Obviously, drivers should be doing pre and post inspections, and the
Mhm.
stuff that
Mhm.
little lights and things like that that can should be a driver's responsibility. But at the end of the day, when you've got some major equipment failures, that's on the company, and that should be held responsible to them. And when you're able to go back to the table and the driver can say, yeah, this isn't my issue, but this is, you can kind of differentiate between what really is the driver's responsibility and what is the company's responsibility. So it's trying to level the playing field that, again, on both sides, that the drivers are protected and good companies are protected and good drivers are protected.
Yeah, we talk about that. Justin and I are heavily involved with Ready App, and Ready App is also one of our major sponsors, and we talk about it a lot. And I know Justin wants to get on this conversation as well because it is kind of like, a double-edged sword, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, it ends up kind of being like the way I proposed it, and I actually had a good conversation with some of the higher ups at FMCSA. They actually did reach out and have some conversations with me because it did touch a few nerves when I set this out. But I blasted it out to everybody, and they did reach out, and they asked some questions, and I said, the best way to look at this is like you're building a baseball team, and you're an aggregate score of your roster.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so, you take the batting average of all of your drivers, and
Baseball card. Where have we heard that?
Yeah, well, yeah,
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 and now you're able to kind of look at it and be like, all right, this is a good player, this is a good player, this is a good player, and when you're ready, you're like, hey, I'm going to ship this player off and send him out because he's just not up to snuff. And when that player is traded or moved or whatever else, your overall batting average goes up, your stats go up, your team does better, all those good things. So.
I do believe he was in our conversation in the last week. We at Ready App, we're in the process of creating a baseball card, we call it, where it's going to take several different factors to give a driver a score from 1 to 100, trying to help the good drivers stand out, and then the medium drivers learn how to get better. And I was saying the same thing, is like, why can't we have that, like you just said, a team average as a carrier? Go, okay, well, we need to up our score. If we let go the bottom 4 or 5 drivers, which in reality you can let them go with no repercussions because they're not performing numbers wise. And then second, you go, okay, recruiters, we can't take anybody under an 82 right now because we need to bump our score up to a 90 average. Then we can go back to the insurance company and go, hey, this is what we have as a driver lineup. Can we get a discount? And I would think in time, when the adoption of it's done, you're going to have carriers go and or insurances go, hey, you're in the 90th percentile of your trucks. Yeah, let's relook at your numbers and see if we can't save you. Because a little bit of savings per truck for some of these carriers can be big money. So I like how you said that because that's kind of how I went with it the other day. But my question is, with all your experience and all the different factors, how difficult is it for a carrier to balance safety, compliance, operations, and then the main thing they're doing it for is profitability all at the same time? Because I know that's difficult. And of course, drivers, they could care less about them. They just want to know they're making money. They don't even care if the carrier they're working for is making any money.
Yeah, that's always been the tougher uphill sledding that you go through, especially when you start getting, light on drivers and you still have customers that, you're bringing in the pay, and you're having those tough conversations with your dispatchers and the dispatch managers of, like, hey, I've got loads to run, and you're like, yeah, but that driver, you're running a hard risk if you're going to continue running them. And I try to take a look at it from, the intent and the thought process behind what the drivers are doing. Good drivers are going to make honest mistakes. It's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
It's inevitable. We've all been there. We've all done something. I was in a Walmart parking lot the other day. Wind caught my door and bumped somebody's bumper, and it's like, no fault of anybody. The lady got out. She came over and she's like, "Oh, you're totally fine." Versus me opening my door and purposefully slamming it into her van and not caring. And that's the same way for all drivers and even dispatchers and stuff. It's really the attitude and intent behind what we're trying to accomplish. And I think being able to have the good relationships on both sides, to be able to talk to the drivers and know their lifestyle, know their background, kind of get in their headspace of what they were trying to accomplish. And the same thing with the dispatchers, is you get an idea of intent and what they're trying to accomplish, and I think that really bridges the gap, not just taking everything at face value in black and white. And unfortunately, I learned some good lessons. In fact, as a recruiter, you get a lot of stuff that's on black and white on paper. If you look at something on paper, you're immediately going to go, yeah, this is not going to work. And then you happen to have a conversation with, one of those drivers, and they can explain, and then you go, oh yeah, this is completely different than what you read. And being able to have those types of relationships with people where you're not just a number, you're a driver, you're a person, you're a family man, family woman, whatever that is, can make a big difference in the world.
A driver gets pulled over for a roadside inspection. We talk about this we talk about like driver attitude and driver professionalism a lot on this show. Drivers get nervous, they get angry, they get delayed when they get pulled over. Walk us through what you talk to your drivers about what they should do, what they should absolutely not do in that moment.
Yeah, number one rule is, if you're like, I'm the post, and if you need to vent, you need to get that frustration out, you call me
Mhm.
first, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to sit here and let you vent. And some of that is the initial conversation. They can immediately call, be hot and heavy, and they're loud, they're frustrated. They're frustrated because they've spent however many days, nights, whatever on the road, breakdowns, bad fuel, stuck at shippers and receivers. So they're already frustrated. And the first words of, I just got pulled over and I got this going on, and I just stay quiet. You just let them go. And then eventually the question is going to come. Are you listening? Yeah, I'm listening. I'm waiting for you to let me know if you need me to let you vent or you're looking for advice. And it's always the question. Do you need to vent, or do you want me to help you through this process? Which one is it going to be? And sometimes, like, no, I just need, it's usually that question. When you pose that question to them, they're immediately like, no, 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 just needed a vent. I'm sorry. It's not you. It's
Right.
this situation. And
Yeah.
we try to convey that to, as soon as we bring a driver on board or they sit in the office here, that's the conversation we're having, is like, look, you're going to run into bad people. You're going to run into bad situations. And when you get that, I would rather have you vent that through me. And if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're doing everything correctly, I'm going to go to the tables for you and I will defend you tooth and nail. You make the other mistake and you do something wrong,
Yeah.
it becomes a different conversation that we're going to be having here. But if you do what you're supposed to do, you call me and go through all the steps, I will go to I'll go to war for you. Don't worry about it. Just do what I asked you to do, and we'll take care of you.
Yep. I always said, you do what's right, let them do what's wrong,
Yep.
Just do what's right every time, and more times than not, you'll come out on top. So if a driver then has, say he gets into a bad spot, he has CSA damage on their record, it's not catastrophic, but it's there. What's the honest, realistic path back? Are they just kind of surviving the 2 year clock, or is there something that your team on the corporate side can do, or is there something that they can do?
So are we talking about my proposal or just in general, real, what we're dealing with
Well,
now?
I'm asking every, yeah, you're both. So where is it at now, and also your proposal?
Yeah, right now, it really kind of comes down to, again, what was the situation that took place and what was the intent behind their actions. I have no problem with filing, not guilty pleas in the court systems and filing, with the FMCSA to try and get stuff removed. It really, again, goes back to, is it an honest mistake or were they just doing something that they shouldn't have been doing and they got caught doing it? I've got an example of, gentlemen getting their trucks booted because they decided to go park in a mall parking lot with signs clearly up everywhere, and
Mhm.
and you're like, all right, well, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do for you at this point because I have
Yeah.
video that I saw through your camera that you did what you were supposed to do. And then I've had other ones where especially like scale tickets and things that aren't out inside of their control, and it's those are the ones that I will go like, yep, you moved 2 miles down the road, got pulled into a scale and something happened, and like, hey, I will fight those. We had one, like a more recent one, where a gal got her loading dock, the lock on the trailer got stuck.
Mhm.
And so when she got pulled in, the scale was off, and it was, significantly off by her on her tandems because it was just locked in place. And they wrote her a $2,200 fine for the overweight portion of it, and in her name and everything. And I said, you know what, they fixed the issue. She was free to go, not overscale at all. But they refused to remove the ticket, refused to remove the fine to it, and I said, you know what, you did nothing wrong. Let me take this on. I will defend you. Let me take that burden on. In systems like this and the newer stuff, I think this comes back to there has to be a symbiotic relationship between operations and the drivers, and I really do think there's a big disconnect at times of drivers have this assumption that operations are just out for the money in the business, and the operation staff can sometimes think that drivers just don't care. And after lots of conversations and sitting down, this is not the case. There are a few bad apples, and unfortunately the bad apples will ruin it for everybody. But in the case of the new proposal, it's really kind of bridge that gap where where you stand within the company knows their score, the driver knows what their score is. And from a driver standpoint, being able to know, again, kind of like, going back to a baseball card, but if you know your batting average, you know your worth, you can have better
Mhm.
conversations with your dispatchers and your brokers, and like, hey,
That's right.
I'm an A-Rod player. I want to be
That's
treated like
exactly
I
right.
want to be
Yep.
treated like an A-Rod, and
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
that's where it goes. And the same thing going to the companies. You have a company that's able to go back and say like, yeah, look at our drivers. This is our roster. This is our score. We're the New York Yankees. You want to play for
Mhm.
us? You better be bringing some talent.
Right.
From that aspect alone, you're developing those companies and those cohesiveness where you can go back to insurance companies, you can go back to these captive groups, you can go back and just benefit everybody where we can lower costs, lower the dangers, get more better conversations about the safety and how we're doing things. And the drivers and companies that unfortunately just say don't care or don't have that much stake in it will just eventually dwindle and kind of fall off the table. And it's a measure to try and cut off all the excess, we'll say, fat that's kind of hanging there that
Mhm.
people just right now skirt under the systems. And if you are able to hold companies and drivers accountable to these kind of scores, I think it's a game changer. You know.
I-
Well, we hope so with it, and would definitely like to talk to you about it, after the show, because
mhm.
it's something that we've been working on for a while now, and your piece definitely turned some heads. So, it's really good stuff.
Most definitely. I have a question. As we're a driver first mentality group, as you can probably see by now, there's one thing that I don't understand, and maybe you understand it. Maybe it's something you might agree it needs to change. And a lot of drivers don't know this. It's getting pulled over and given a warning. I'm not
Yeah.
a big fan of that at all because, you know, me and you get pulled over in our personal vehicle. We're praying just for a warning. We drive off, insurance never knows the difference. It doesn't happen that way in trucking. And I blame it now in my state of Tennessee, our DOT officers became and state troopers merged. I always blamed it the state troopers were kind of ticked off and didn't want to do the extra work. So they just gave warnings because then they're not confrontational. They're not getting into it with the driver. They can just like, here, you're free to go. Boom. They go back and look. I got all these points. And I had actually had a driver back when I was dispatched a couple years ago. I kept telling him, you know, ask for a ticket, take the points. We'll go to court, get it dropped down to one. He ended up getting let go because in 6 months' time, he had got like 5 warnings and it was too many for the threshold and they gave him the boot. You know, when I will say that for the first time to a driver, they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why do I want to take a ticket? Well, you can fight it. You can't fight a warning. What do you think about that process? Because to me, it's not fair. If they did something wrong, write them up, or if it's something that you can see them fixing, or even put them on a probation. Like if you get pulled over for the same violation in a 90-day period, then that ticket and your ticket will pop up or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on board with it. It was one of the biggest frustrations, especially on the safety side. And a driver will come back and they'll be like, "Oh, I got a clean inspection." You're like, "Oh, you did?" Yeah. And they're like, "But I got a warning on this." And I immediately like hand to forehead. You're just like, "Oh God."
Hmm.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, here we go. And it's like I'm having that same conversation with drivers. Like, if he's going to write you a warning, you get out there and you say, "Hey, look, if you're going to give me, you either give me a ticket or you give me nothing, because
Yeah.
there's no way for me to fight this warning." And I think some of that comes back to education, even at the state and county levels for the inspectors, because and again, a lot of these inspectors that go through, they think that they're given a.
They think they're doing the driver a favor.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
and so I do think that there needs to be better conversations between law enforcement and the trucking industry to really show impact. Part of what I did put in mind was we'll call it the recency decay. And basically what that is like just it is to say you had a warning category that was built into either the inspections or your MVR, PSP, wherever that kind of falls in at. Is that depending on a warning, it would carry a different weight, and then over the time, over say a 24 to 36 month period, there's a decay factor to that. So if you're not getting additional inspections or additional warnings, they just literally fall right off. So again, you can have that one maybe bad error, bad judgment that happened. You got a warning on it, you don't do it again, it clears off your record, and it just eventually falls off of there. But yeah, I'm 100% on board in your guys' category. It's like either write the ticket or let them go. There's no reason to give them a warning at that point other than it's just
Right.
chaos.
And I like your idea of, hey, put it in writing if there's a warning. So then that driver will probably think 2 or 3 times, hey, I got to make sure I check that or whatever that might be. So then it doesn't pop again in that time frame.
Let's talk about your company. Specialized hauling is a different world. Oversized loads, unique freight. There's definitely more variables. How does that complexity change the way you think about safety and driver training, there at your company versus maybe a more standard van company?
Well, once you start getting into, super loads and over any type of oversized, overscale, doesn't matter what it is, the risk goes up, your insurance rates go up, and there's a lot more involved with it. And a lot of times you're not when we're dealing with these loads, these aren't $30,000 loads. These are, $1 million machines that are going down the road that have to get from A to B safely. So there's a lot more trust involved with that. One, there's trust coming from the customer, and then we have to have trust and faith in our drivers to be able to accomplish those tasks and get from A to B in a safe manner. So from a safety standpoint, your safety goes through the roof on those ends, and there's a lot more involved with it. You're talking about getting all of your permitting done. There's routing involved with it. The costs go up. um, you know on the backside of that, though, is there's also some pretty cool stuff that get to haul and talk about. So some of these
Right.
guys,
Yeah.
they get to haul the big Daytona signs when Daytona 500 was going around.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna ask, like, what's some of the cool shit that you've hauled?
Yeah, we got some so the Daytona 500 signs that were going down. We've had pretty regular. We have $1 million generators and machines that are going out to the West Coast, and it doesn't seem like much, but an entire 53-foot trailer that is essentially a generator built on a trailer that now has to get, from point A to point B. We've hauled steel beams that were coming out of 9/11, back, in
Oh
those
my.
days.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten our hands dirty in some pretty cool stuff. A lot, like, around here in Wisconsin, you get a lot of stuff of like the, paper equipment and the mill equipment and stuff like that that are, oversized, but it's interesting. Some good stuff out there.
Well, I want to ask you, so talk to our driver listeners out there because all drivers want to haul that type of freight. They want the good store, the big load. How do they need to set their career up? Because you can't just come out of the school and start that for sure. And you got to have certain, requirements and things. But like even on the safety side, before they try to come to you or to your company, how long do they need to be, cleared of, no issues for their safety? Like what endorsements do they need to so they can start like because I think that's a lack in the industry is there's really not a lot of material out there for drivers, owner operators to know, hey, if you want to go and do this or haul this, you need to do these steps.
One of the bigger ones that I think that gets missed quite a bit is actually load securement on any load, whether it's a flatbed load or just, getting a 53-foot drive in. Load securement seems to be one of those missing hotspots that just doesn't get a lot of good
Mhm.
training on.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, even dealing with shippers that will, put a tag on the door, lock it up before a driver gets the chance to inspect it,
Respect. Yeah.
things like that. And, a driver will be like, well, the load shifted. Well, did you take a look at your load? It was locked. I couldn't do anything with it. And if I cut the lock, then, those kind of conversations. I think for a driver that is wanting to get into flatbedding in general is really good understanding of load securement. I mean, you're going to be dealing with chains, you're going to be dealing with straps. Obviously, you got lights and signage and a lot of stuff that goes around with it. You're going to be throwing some weight around. You have to.
Yeah.
Generally, it's not an older man's game at that point.
All
You
right.
got a small window. You got a small window in there before the body's like, I don't know, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But sometimes people play, they play the game a little bit longer. Your body's going to take a toll, but you're going to get paid for it.
Mhm.
But definitely load securement, understanding you got to have, gloves and, hard hat and steel toes. And you're going to be getting in and out of stuff. You're going to be in bad weather, good weather. You don't get to just, pull up to a dock and have somebody unload it. You're going to
Mhm.
be unstrapping it all, throwing tarps, all kinds of good stuff. So one, you got to have a, going back to the military days, you got to be able to embrace the suck. You're going to have days that they're going to be
Respect.
terrible, but
Embrace the suck. I like
Yeah, I
that.
like yeah.
you just got to enjoy it though. Like I'm going to have a crap day today, but I'm going to get paid well for it. It's going to be a great
Right.
product. I'm going to make it from A to B. And I think those, uh, those end up being some of the good stories, later down the road. It's, when you're, hitting 67 years old, you're ready to retire, and you go back, yeah, back in my day, this is what I
Yeah.
used to do. And you got
Yeah.
good stories to tell.
Yeah, it's almost like an art form. I mean, those guys take pride in their work. Not that van drivers shouldn't be valued as well, but it's a different game, and those guys take pride and they like take pictures of what they haul and stuff like that. And like you said, they'll likely have definitely a lot of good stories. So, do you guys offer any kind of training program there for van drivers who want to switch over?
Yeah, usually, so most of the times when we're setting up for flatbeds, it's usually a two-man job. And we've had filtered a couple of the younger guys or anybody that's interested in it. So they'll go out with one of the more experienced flatbedders. So they get an idea of one, is this something they really, really want to get into? Because the physical nature
Yeah.
of it can be a deterrent for some. So they get some opportunities to go out with the experienced drivers for them to show them how they should be securing loads, what they're doing, at the customer side of things, and really getting a feel for what it takes to be a flatbedder. And a lot of times we do get interest of van guys that want to go over there, and I'd say it's maybe about 25% success rate once they realize
Right.
it
Right.
really is, it's a tougher gig.
Yeah.
But
Well,
sometimes when they get a taste of the money, then it's like, all
Yeah,
right.
they see that money and they're like, I'll do whatever it takes, you know.
that's right.
So,
Well, I mean, there's a lot more to it on securement. I mean, you have to put the strap or the chain in certain places. You can't just throw it across something and think that's going to work. You might have to throw it through it. You got to climb up on the deck hundreds of times. And then if you're tarping, which I've had to do more than my share, and I don't even have a CDL, that's probably the nastiest job in the industry because it's nasty. It gets wet. I mean,
yeah.
it's a lot to it.
Yeah.
Yep. Even on the Conestogas, you try to get those guys to like pull a Conestoga, and they're closing the curtains and it's stuck and it's rusty, or they bumps up and they
Mhm.
can't tear it. And it's just like, yep, there's a lot that goes into this. Got to be a lot more careful in what you're doing.
Well, last one before we close out. So you spent your career fighting for drivers in a system that often treats them like an afterthought. What's the one thing you want every driver listening right now to walk away from believing about their own value in the industry?
You know, when I've talked to drivers, and, the ones that get frustrated over the road and they think about not being in this industry and things like that, is every driver matters. We can't do what we do in this country without drivers, and it's a
Mhm.
harder environment now because we're not seeing the younger generation get into this, and we're relying a lot on the middle and older age generations to still keep this country moving. And it's a good lifestyle, and you might be isolated and alone and out in a truck by yourself, but understand that there are people that rely on you. We need you out there. We need drivers. We need people who care about what we're doing in this country. And sometimes it might not feel that you're valued, but I promise you, if you reach out to your operations team and you say like, hey, how am I doing? I guarantee you that there's somebody there that's going to reach out and touch back and say like, look, you're needed, you're valued, and we're going to do our best to make sure that you're taken care of. It's sometimes you're not able to do everything you want to do, but we're going to give you everything that we can do.
Yeah, right. Well said.
Well, I wanted to bring up one more thing before we go. I
Yeah,
appreciate your service, first of all, and I'm partial
yeah,
to,
thank you.
to veterans. I'm not a veteran by no means, but my both my grandfathers were. You were heavily involved in HOOAH, HOOAH, out of Wisconsin, supporting veterans and family. Tell us a little bit about that program.
Yeah, HOOAH Wisconsin. So two buddies of mine that were Rangers had started the program, a branch from Minnesota that was originally the headquarters. We ended up becoming our own 501(c)(3) a couple years back. Moved away from the national organization, which all the groups did, the different states did. The focus really became on veterans and what happens after you're getting done with service, and trying to
Mhm.
create communities that focus on the mental health and stability and the support systems for
Mhm.
veterans. And we really trying to get programs out there. So not just here's money and try to throw money at an individual, say here, hey, we're going to pay a bill. No, we're gonna put money into a program to help you learn how to budget. We're going to put money into a fishing program to give you a skill down the road. We're going to allow you to go to yoga and learn how to stretch and find a place in your mind that'll help you relax. We're going to give you access to therapy. We have a warrior wellness program, and I just retired, stepped away from the organization this last December, so I stepped down. So I'm 6 months clear after a decade. So this is all old hand stuff, but yeah,
Yeah.
our warrior wellness program was a cornerstone for what we did, and we had great therapists that really work one on one with the veterans that are coming through, with really being able to sit down and have a place for them to not only deal with the mental issues that can sneak up on us, but really kind of create a community to understand like, hey, even when you get out of service and you get back to the civilian side of things, there's a community of veterans and support systems that are available to you, and we want to make sure that they're well taken care of as well.
Very good. Well, tell people where they can find you, follow you on, LinkedIn, Facebook, where they can follow your work and also learn more about dedicated systems.
Yeah, website for dedicated systems is just dedsys, DEDSYS .com. But the coffee shop, by the way, is just Wisco Sips. You guys do everyone is swinging here. It's growing in popularity. The drivers and everybody that comes through keep it pretty well populated. But we got Wisco Sips, a part of the family group over here. They do a
That's
really great
awesome.
job in expanding.
Mhm.
But yeah, LinkedIn, you just look me up, Scott Conklin, right now, Director of Ops over here at Dedicated. And feel free to reach out. Email is just scott@dedsys.com. Reach out
Okay.
anytime. Happy to chat and help anybody out who can.
Good deal. All right. Well, Justin, you want to close us out with our sponsors?
Yeah, yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by Gray Cross. It's graycross.org. Gray Cross is focused on supporting trucking families and the people who keep America moving every day. Go check out the website. They're doing great things. If you can just even donate $1, it'd be much appreciative and will go to a great cause. So that's graycross.org.
And they are a 501c3.
And then our other sponsor, of course, is ReadyApp. ReadyApp is helping modernize the connection between drivers, carriers, and brokers through verified driver passport, streamline onboarding tools designed specifically for the trucking industry. You can go down and go to ready-app.com. You can download the app on Google or Android or Apple. You want to create a driver profile that's going to organize your digitally CDL information, work history, endorsements, certificates, onboarding documents, all in one profile, and then you can share it with anyone, an onboarder, insurance, a carrier recruiter, and then there's a ton of benefits that you can get from that. So go check that out again, ready-app.com.
All right, Scott, we appreciate you coming on. Like us, share us, follow us on Facebook, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the above. We really appreciate you listening. We'll catch you next time, and everyone drive safe. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.